We've been thinking a lot lately about the semi-quincentennial, the 250th anniversary of the birth of our country. And it's got me thinking about what the bicentennial was like in July of 1976. You look back at that time period, we were also going through great upheaval. This was in the wake of Watergate, Vietnam, and you had a president, Gerald Ford, who was not elected to the office. He had never been elected to anything other than being a congressman from Michigan. What he had was a lot of common decency, respect, and he wanted to celebrate the country both personally as a point of pride. He's written about remembering being a kid in Michigan and, you know, having sparklers and fireworks, and his stepdad going out and celebrating with them in the street. And so this small town Americana that Gerald Ford is famous for, and this very good natured, calm, steady hand in the wake of Watergate. Looking at 1976, this was a great opportunity for him and for Betty Ford, who is one of my favorite first ladies, because of what she did for breast cancer awareness. You know, at a time when people weren't ever even mentioning the word breast cancer, it was considered taboo at the time. Betty Ford spoke about her own diagnosis, even when Gerald Ford's press secretary told her he could just say that she was dealing with women problems. She said, no, I want it to be out there in a press release that I have been diagnosed with breast cancer. So that saved an untold number of lives. So there's my little Betty Ford plug, because she's one of my favorite first ladies ever. But I also want to talk about what happened specifically when Queen Elizabeth came to the US. This was in July of 1976, celebrating the bicentennial, this moment of cohesion after Watergate, where the country was coming together. Strangely enough, having the reigning British Queen of England coming and celebrating American independence from England was not lost on her or the president, the irony of all of that. And it was a really fascinating night. During this state visit, there was a state dinner on July 7th, 1976, at the White House in the Rose Garden. There was a beautiful tent put up, and despite what you may have heard from the Trump presidency, these tents, and I know I've covered some state dinners during the Obama White House years, are gorgeous. Betty Ford had decided to have the tent outside because inside the state dining room only seats about 150 people, and she didn't want to be limited to the number of people they could invite. There were paintings on the walls. There were chandeliers, flowers overflowing, and Betty Ford wisely insisted on a dance floor so that women wouldn't have their heels sinking into the grass. So in this elaborate tent set up, took the resident staff at the White House weeks, days to prepare and put it up. Suddenly, if you've been to DC, you know that we can have massive storms. And a massive storm broke out just 90 minutes before the dinner. Everyone was really concerned about what was going to happen. In addition to that, inside the White House, Jack Ford had rented his tux. One of the Ford's sons had rented his tux. He was in his 20s at the time, but the studs had not arrived for the tux. So he was frantically running around the White House looking for studs. He found himself in the president and first lady's bedroom, rummaging through their drawer. Now, he walks to the elevator, and out on the elevator, out pops out Queen Elizabeth and Prince Philip, along with Jack's mother and father, the president and first lady of the United States. And he's kind of disheveled, looking for these studs. Eventually he finds them. And Queen Elizabeth says to Betty Ford, "Don't worry, I've got one of those at home too." Obviously referring to now King Charles. And so in this rare moment of levity, you see what's going on behind the scenes. And I always think of the resident staff and what's going on at the White House as kind of ducks floating above the water. Everything looks serene as it's supposed to, but the feet are just moving at a rapid clip to keep it all going. So this storm breaks out, and a number of things happen that night. It goes well. Queen Elizabeth wants to invite Captain Tennille, Telly Savalas, Bob Hope, to give you a sense of the 1970s era that we're dealing with. And famously, Queen Elizabeth dances with President Ford, and the military band at the White House breaks out into a rendition of The Lady is a Tramp. Betty Ford and President Ford were aghast. Apparently, Queen Elizabeth thought it was very humorous. And so another thing that happened was Betty Ford kept putting her foot in her mouth. She would say, "Your Highness and Your Majesty," when it's His Highness and Her Majesty. So there were all of these little things that happened during the night. You have to remember, Queen Elizabeth had met 13 presidents. Every president during her 70-year reign, which is just remarkable, except for LBJ. And there were a series of circumstances that stopped the two of them from meeting. But I think when we look back on this historic night in Washington and what it meant for the country, what we're seeing is a country that was divided that then came together in unity because of the work that President Ford and Betty Ford did. And I love Betty Ford's book, The Times of My Life. It actually outsold President Ford's book. So, and he would joke saying, I bet her book's going to do better than mine. And it did. As you can see, it's been very loved by me. And I think she was a fantastic first lady and a candid person. And I think that, the contrast we see with Melania Trump today is stark. There are obviously a lot of things happening culturally that make it a different time, social media being one of them. But what Betty Ford was able to do was be relatable. She was obviously someone who struggled with substance abuse. The Betty Ford Center is still a remarkably important part of people's recovery. So her legacy really lives on. And when I think about July 1976, I think about Betty Ford and all those near calamities that happened at the White House and how they got through it with laughter and a lightness and not taking themselves too seriously. And I think we can all agree in Washington, we can use a little bit more of that. So I hope you enjoyed a little walk down memory lane here and a look at what it was like in Washington during the 1976 Bicentennial celebration.